Well, Norm, sounds like you're extra happy about things this morning. What brought on the tenor solo?
Just thinking about my vacation trip, Tech. Only 3 weeks away now, and everything is all set except giving the car a going over. What we call travel season service. Then I'm
Whoa, hold it a minute. Just what is travel season service? Something new and special?
Nothing really new, Tech, but we think it's sort of special. You see, it's not just a tune-up as we usually think of a tune-up. Travel season service is a combination of all the things we technicians can do to make sure our customers can take off on a vacation trip without worrying about any kind of car trouble. Naturally, this includes oil and filter change along with lubrication service. In addition, we should make sure the car's engine is in the best of condition and the transmission is properly adjusted. These are standard tune-up items, but there's more to it than that. Any operations we can perform that will contribute to the car's performance and to the comfort, convenience, and safety of the passengers are included in this special service. In fact, some of the items, such as wheel balance and alignment, fit into more than one category. So why don't I run through a sort of a checklist of the things we do, and you can tell me what you think of it.
Sounds mighty interesting, Norm. Carry on.
We always check the car's mileage when it comes in to see if one of the certified car care intervals is due. For instance, one of the first recommended maintenance services is tire rotation. Inspect the tire tread to see if there's any unusual wear because of incorrect wheel alignment. Also check for cuts, bruises, and nails. We recommend checking wheel balance when tires are rotated. It's no pleasure to drive a car when an unbalanced wheel and tire is affecting the handling characteristics. Inflate all the tires to the correct pressure, depending on the car and the tire size.
And don't forget the spare, even if you don't rotate the tires. Another thing, be sure to explain to the customer that he may have to increase the tire pressures if he's expecting to carry a lot of extra weight, especially in a station wagon. There's a good tire pressure chart in the reference book for session number 65-9.
Right, Tech. If the car has 20,000 miles or more on it, brakes are a very important inspection item. This is especially true on later model cars with automatic adjusters.
Maybe you better explain that, Norm.
All right, Tech. Self-adjusting brakes are almost too convenient from the service point of view. We all know how the automatic adjusters maintain correct lining-to-drum clearance. As a result, the brake pedal stays at the normal height, so the customer has no physical indication of the amount of wear on the brake linings, and he is inclined to forget about brake attention. If the pedal doesn't stay at the normal height, check the automatic adjusters to see if they're working. Inspect the linings for contamination or unusual wear. Contaminated linings can't be saved. Find the cause of the contamination and correct it. Then replace with approved lining sets, but make sure you use the linings specified for the car you're working on. Poor driving habits will cause extensive brake lining wear at relatively low mileage. This is a situation that calls for some very diplomatic driver education.
It sure does, Norm. What's next?
Well, if the car is 1 or 2 years old or has about 20,000 miles on it, it's a good idea to check the front wheel bearings. They may need to be cleaned and repacked. And just as important, make sure the wheel bearing end play is from 0 to 0.003 of an inch. Readjust them according to the directions in the service manual. If the bearings are preloaded, they'll burn out. On the other hand, loose wheel bearings can be the cause of steering wander or severe brake pulling, and of course the bearing will eventually be ruined. Speaking of steering, inspect all the seals in the steering linkage and ball joints. Look for deterioration or distortion.
If the joints are due for lubrication, remember to use a low-pressure gun so you don't blast the seals out of place. Where do we go from here, Norm?
The next subject is visibility, Tech. Inspect the windshield wiper blades. If there are indications of deterioration or if they don't wipe clean, they should be replaced. Test the washers and, if necessary, re-aim the nozzles. At the same time, you can check out the wiper motor operation and wiper blade parking. Headlights, taillights, stoplights, and turn signals are important safety items which must be checked out during the travel season service.
Some customer education is in order here, too. Advise the owner to pick up some spare fuses and make sure he knows where all the fuses are located. He should also know that a blown fuse is a signal to have that circuit checked as soon as possible for a short or an overload.
Right, Tech. The interior lights deserve some attention, too. Check out all the courtesy lights, map light, and instrument lamps. Next, if the car is air-conditioned, see that the unit is performing as it should. Always explain the operation to the owner and emphasize the importance of closing the fresh air vent doors when the air conditioner is turned on.
Don't forget that some air-conditioned cars need engine antifreeze even during the summer months. But I guess you'll be talking about cooling systems later, right, Norm?
I sure will, Tech. Right now, though, I want to hit some things that are too often neglected during preparations for a trip, starting with door and glass operation. When people are traveling, they sometimes leave valuables such as cameras, clothing, and souvenirs in the car. It takes a lot of pleasure out of the trip if they come up missing. Operate all the door locks with the buttons and the key. And don't forget the trunk lock. In areas where salt is used in the winter for snow removal, the lock cylinders are apt to be corroded. Use Mopar or Chrysler lockies on lock cylinders that don't operate freely.
If you run into a lock cylinder that's hung up real tight, try squirting a little bit of Mopar carburetor solvent in through the keyhole. Turn the lock several times until it loosens up, and then blow it out with dry air and apply lockies as Norm suggested. Be sure to wipe any excess solvent off the paint when you're finished.
Thanks, Tech. In addition to the door locks, make sure the vent windows latch securely. Crank or power-operated vents should close fully. While we're on the subject of glass, check all the windows to see if they operate freely. You may need to lubricate or adjust the regulator, linkage, or channels. Use light engine oil to lubricate the door hinge pins, door check arms, check spring ends, and the striker rotor bearings. Use Mopar Dory stick lubricant on the striker plate.
Go easy on the lubrication in the places where it might rub off on clothing, though. Any other door service, Norm?
There sure is, Tech. A lot of customers have asked us to leak test the doors, and especially the rear deck lid.
Good idea, Norm. A leaky deck lid can sure raise Cain with expensive luggage and clothing.
The body group in the service manual has good illustrations of all the weather strip attachments, including the rear deck lid seal. There's one more item inside the passenger compartment. Check the seat belt anchor bolts. See that they're tight and not corroded. And if it's an older car not equipped with belts, you owe your customer a recommendation to install them.
You're absolutely right, Norm. But right now, I'd like to recommend that somebody turn the record. Okay, Norm, I suppose you're about ready to move out of the passenger compartment and get up into the engine room, correct?
Right as usual, Tech. There's a lot of electricity running around under the hood, and I like to make sure it all gets to the right place at the right time. As always, the best place to start is the battery. Check the specific gravity and make a capacity test. Measure the specific gravity in each cell, and you won't have to check the individual cell voltage. On older cars, examine the top of the battery for holes in the sealing compound. Seal the holes and clean off the battery to avoid current leakage and self-discharge. That includes the cable terminals and battery parts. Coat the terminals and posts with petrolatum after they're installed. If the battery carries a good charge and hasn't used a lot of water, you can just about take it for granted that the charging system is in good shape. You don't need to make all the charging system checks. But even if the charging system seems to be all right, check all the charging circuit connections. Make sure they're all clean and tight. It doesn't take more than a couple of minutes and can avoid an awful lot of trouble.
Before you put a wrench on any of those charging circuit connections, be sure to disconnect the battery. On cars equipped with alternators, the charging circuit is always hot when the battery is connected.
That's a good point, Tech. But unless the belts are properly adjusted, all the rest of the charging circuit precautions don't mean much. So check the alternator belt, as well as all the other drive belts for condition and tension. Certainly no pre-vacation trip service would be complete without a close, critical look at the ignition system. Some of the procedures have been changed quite a bit. First of all, we no longer recommend washing the distributor cap in detergent solution. Even more important, don't remove the high-tension cables from either the distributor cap or the coil, unless testing indicates high resistance, broken insulation, or damaged nipples. Now here's why. When the cables and nipples are installed originally, the nipples form a seal around the towers to keep out moisture and prevent corrosion. If the nipple is removed from the tower, the seal will be broken, and it won't reseal properly if the same nipple is reinstalled.
That's right, Norm. As long as the cables and nipples are properly installed in the beginning, with a good terminal contact and a tight seal on the towers, they shouldn't give you any trouble. In fact, I've seen a lot of cases where ignition troubles were started by careless and indiscriminate removal and reinstallation of the cables. Why don't you run through the procedures for testing cables without removing them from the towers, Norm?
Good idea, Tech. Now first I check for spark leaks. Ground one end of a test probe. Then disconnect one spark plug cable at a time at the plug end. Wipe off the cable and isolate the terminal from any possible ground. Start the engine and run the free end of the test probe along the cable, moving very slowly. A spark jumping from the cable insulation to the test probe indicates broken or punctured insulation. You'll need an ohm meter to test cable resistance.
But don't pull the cables from the cap. Remove the cap from the distributor.
Tech's right. Connect the ohm meter to each of the contacts inside the cap and the spark plug terminals of the cables.
You might make the job a little easier by using a timing light adapter on the spark plug end of the cables.
That's a good tip, Tech. Maximum cable resistance is 30,000 ohms. If you get a higher reading, first check your ohm meter connections. If the reading is still too high, carefully remove the cable from the cap and measure the resistance of the cable alone. If the resistance is more than 30,000 ohms, replace the cable and nipple. You can also check the resistance of the coil high-tension cable without removing it from either the coil or distributor cap. First, make sure the coil primary terminals are tight. Then, connect the ohm meter to the center contact inside the cap and either coil primary terminal. Maximum allowable resistance of the coil and cable is 25,000 ohms. A reading higher than 25,000 ohms could mean either a bad cable or coil. Remove the cable and check the resistance of the cable only. Maximum resistance for the cable is 15,000 ohms.
Don't ever forget that poor contact is a major cause of high resistance, so always take a good look at the cable terminals and the tower sockets. And another thing, before you leave that ignition coil, make sure the primary wire terminals are leading away from the tower. You don't want to give the secondary voltage a chance to arc from the tower to the primary circuit. Now, how about distributor points, Norm?
Well, I always look the points over real close. And if they're badly burned or have a big buildup, change them. And of course, find out what caused the condition and correct it. Check the dwell angle and the ignition timing.
And unless you want to be classified as a backyard mechanic, always use a timing light adapter on the spark plug. Don't ever puncture the cable insulation.
Right, Tech. Next on the list are the spark plugs. Every time I pull a set of plugs from a car, I look them over carefully to see what's been happening inside the engine.
That's good thinking, Norm. And there's a good explanation of spark plug deposits in the service manuals.
Right, Tech. I use those illustrations all the time. If the plugs are still serviceable, clean and re-gap them. And one of the most important steps is making sure the end of the center electrode is filed flat and the ground electrode is parallel with the flat end. Here's why. A spark will jump across the narrowest part of a gap. If the narrowest part is of small area, there won't be much of a spark. So to get the best possible spark, use all of the available area. If the two gap surfaces are parallel, the spark will be about the same size as the center electrode. A good fat spark. If you have to install new spark plugs, be sure to use the correct heat range. If you try experimenting, you'll probably wind up with either a tendency to foul if they're too cold, or pre-ignition and possible piston damage if they're too hot.
If you run into a V8 with Mopar plugs in one bank and Champions in the other bank, don't worry about it. They're interchangeable. Check your service manuals and bulletins for the corresponding numbers.
Thanks, Tech. Now, after you've done everything you can for the ignition, check out the fuel system. A good place to start is the crankcase ventilating system. If the valve is stuck closed, there won't be enough crankcase ventilation at highway speeds, and the idle mixture will be too rich. A vent valve that's stuck open will lean out the mixture during both idle and low-speed performance. So if the valve is stuck in either position, clean out the whole system and replace the valve.
Here's one I never quit talking about. The manifold heat control valve. For the time it takes, it's good insurance to check the valve to see if it works freely. If not, use Mopar heat control valve solvent to free it up when the engine is cool. Don't ever substitute a lubricant for the heat control valve solvent.
Good advice, Tech. Usually, the only carburetor adjustments that might be required are idle speed and mixture and the vacuum kick. When you're making the vacuum kick adjustment, be sure you use the correct specs. Check the reference books for sessions 64-1 and 65-1 and your technical service bulletins. On cars prior to 64, operate the choke linkage by hand when the engine is cold. If it sticks, use Mopar carburetor cleaner on the choke shaft, piston, and other critical areas. Check the bowl vent valve to see that it opens at closed throttle. If it doesn't, fuel vaporization in the float bowl could cause a hot starting problem. I know we're running out of time, Tech, so I'll cover a couple more points quickly. Pressure test the radiator cap and cooling system to make sure there are no leaks. Examine all hoses and connections for deterioration and looseness. As you mentioned earlier, cars that are equipped with the reheat type air conditioners need antifreeze protection. And to make sure there is enough inhibitor to prevent cooling system corrosion, add enough antifreeze to take the protection to 15 degrees below zero.
A can of Mopar or Chrysler rust resistor will provide corrosion protection on cars without reheat air conditioners. But don't add any inhibitor to antifreeze unless you know they'll mix all right.
Right, Tech. To wind up the travel season service, check the transmission fluid, differential grease, brake fluid, and power steering oil. And check the lube sticker to see if the car is due for an oil and filter change.
Your travel season service sounds pretty thorough, Norm. But then you always did take good care of your customers. That's why they keep coming back. It's one more way of showing our customers that we care about customer care.